Sarah Martinez had always been the kind of person who helped others before thinking about herself. At 32, she worked as a night shift nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, coming home each morning to her small apartment above the old bakery on Maple Street. The building was over 60 years old, with creaky wooden floors and pipes that made strange noises in the winter. But Sarah loved it there. The rent was cheap, the neighbors were friendly, and she could walk to work in 15 minutes. That particular October morning felt different somehow. Sarah had just finished a 12-hour shift dealing with 3 emergency cases and 2 difficult patients. Her feet ached, her back was sore, and all she wanted was to collapse into bed. She climbed the narrow staircase to the 2nd floor, fumbling with her keys in the dim hallway light. Mrs. Chen from apartment 2B was already up, making breakfast for her twin 5-year-old boys. Sarah could hear them laughing through the thin walls. "Good morning, Sarah," Mrs. Chen called out as she opened her door to grab the newspaper. "You look tired, dear." "Long night?" Sarah managed a weak smile. 3 car accident victims and a heart attack patient. "I'm exhausted." She finally got her key into the lock and pushed open the door to her small 1-bedroom apartment. "I just need a few hours of sleep, then I'll be fine." Mrs. Chen nodded understandingly. "I'll keep the boys quiet until noon. They're going to the park anyway." She disappeared back inside, and Sarah heard her telling the children to use their inside voices. Sarah's apartment was simple, but cozy. A small living room with a second-hand couch faced a tiny kitchen. Her bedroom was just big enough for a bed and dresser. She had painted the walls a warm yellow color last spring, trying to make the place feel more cheerful. Photos of her family back in Texas covered one wall, along with certificates from nursing school and a few thank you cards from grateful patients. She changed into comfortable pajamas and was about to climb into bed when she smelled something strange. It wasn't the usual smell of fresh bread from the bakery downstairs. This was different, acrid and sharp. Sarah walked to her small window and looked down at the street. Everything seemed normal. Early morning joggers were passing by, and old Mr. Thompson was opening his flower shop across the street. The smell got stronger. Sarah opened her bedroom window to get some fresh air, but the strange odor seemed to be coming from inside the building. She put on her robe and stepped into the hallway. The smell was definitely stronger out there. It reminded her of something burning, but not like food burning in an oven. This was more chemical, more dangerous. She knocked on Mrs. Chen's door. "Everything okay in there?" she called softly, not wanting to wake the children if they had gone back to bed. "Yes, fine," came Mrs. Chen's voice. "Why do you ask? Do you smell something burning?" There was a pause. Then Sarah heard Mrs. Chen moving around, probably checking her kitchen. "Now that you mention it, yes. I thought maybe someone downstairs was cooking something unusual." Sarah's nursing training had taught her to trust her instincts, especially when it came to safety. She had seen too many accident victims come through the emergency room to ignore warning signs. "I'm going to check the other apartments," she told Mrs. Chen. "Something doesn't feel right." She walked down the hallway to apartment 2A, where Mr. Davis lived alone. He was 78 years old and sometimes forgot to turn off his stove. Sarah knocked on his door. No answer. She knocked louder. Still nothing. The smell was getting stronger, and now she could see a thin line of smoke coming from under his door. "Mr. Davis," she called out, pounding on the door now. "Mr. Davis, are you okay?" Behind her, she heard Mrs. Chen's door open. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "I think there's a fire in Mr. Davis's apartment." Sarah tried the door handle, but it was locked. The smoke was definitely coming from inside. "Mrs. Chen, call 911 right now. Tell them we have a possible fire at 142 Maple Street, 2nd floor." Mrs. Chen rushed back to her apartment to make the call, while Sarah continued pounding on Mr. Davis's door. She could hear the smoke alarm going off inside now, a shrill beeping that made her heart race. Where was Mr. Davis? Was he unconscious? Had he already escaped and forgotten to tell anyone? The smell was getting worse, and the smoke under the door was getting thicker. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She stepped back and threw her shoulder against the door as hard as she could. It didn't budge. The old building had solid wooden doors with good locks. She tried again, ignoring the pain in her shoulder. "Sarah." Mrs. Chen was back, her phone in her hand. "Fire department is on their way. They said not to try to go inside." But Sarah couldn't just stand there and wait. Her nursing instincts wouldn't let her. If Mr. Davis was inside, unconscious from smoke inhalation, every second counted. She looked around the hallway and spotted the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall near the staircase. Next to it was a small emergency axe behind a glass panel. "Mrs. Chen, get your boys and go downstairs right now," Sarah ordered, her voice firm and calm despite the panic she felt inside. "Wait outside on the street. If you see anyone else in the building, tell them to get out. But what about you? I'm going to get Mr. Davis out of there." Sarah broke the glass panel and grabbed the emergency axe. It was heavier than she expected, but adrenaline was already coursing through her veins. "Go now!" Mrs. Chen hesitated for just a moment, then ran back to her apartment to get her children. Sarah could hear her speaking rapidly to them in both English and Chinese, her voice urgent but controlled. Within minutes, Sarah heard their footsteps on the stairs as they headed to safety. Now alone in the smoky hallway, Sarah raised the axe and swung it at the door handle of apartment 2A. The wood splintered, but the door held. She swung again, harder this time. The handle broke off, but the deadbolt was still engaged. She aimed higher, targeting the area around the deadbolt. On the fourth swing, the door frame cracked enough for her to push the door open. Thick black smoke poured out into the hallway, and Sarah immediately dropped to her hands and knees. She had learned in her emergency training that smoke rises, so the air near the floor would be cleaner. She crawled into the apartment, calling out for Mr. Davis, praying she would find him alive and conscious. The inside of Mr. Davis's apartment was like stepping into a nightmare. Thick smoke made it impossible to see more than a few inches ahead, and the heat hit Sarah like a physical wall. She stayed low, crawling across the familiar layout she knew from visiting him before with groceries and medicine. His apartment was identical to hers, but mirrored. Kitchen to the right. Living room straight ahead, bedroom to the left. The smoke alarm was deafeningly loud, and she could hear crackling sounds coming from the kitchen area. Orange light flickered through the smoke, confirming her worst fears. This wasn't just something burning on the stove, this was a real fire, growing bigger by the minute. "Mr. Davis," she shouted over the noise, then immediately started coughing as smoke filled her lungs. She pulled her robe up over her nose and mouth, trying to filter the air. "Mr. Davis, where are you?" She crawled toward the bedroom first, reasoning that he might still be sleeping. The elderly man took medication that made him drowsy, and he often didn't hear things clearly. The bedroom door was open, and she felt around the bed with her hands. Empty. The sheets were cold. He hadn't been sleeping there recently. Turning back toward the living room, Sarah's eyes were now streaming tears from the smoke. The heat was getting more intense, and she knew she didn't have much time. She crawled toward the kitchen, following the wall with one hand. That's when she heard it, a weak moan coming from somewhere near the stove. "Mr. Davis, keep making noise so I can find you." Another moan, definitely human. Sarah followed the sound, her hand sweeping across the floor until she felt something soft. It was Mr. Davis lying on his side next to the kitchen table. He was conscious but barely, coughing and trying to speak. "Can't breathe," he wheezed. Sarah quickly checked him for injuries. No broken bones that she could feel. No obvious burns, but he was suffering from smoke inhalation. His breathing was shallow and labored. She needed to get him out of there immediately. But he was a big man, at least 180 pounds, and she weighed barely 120. "Mr. Davis, I need you to help me," she said, putting her mouth close to his ear so he could hear her over the smoke alarm. "We have to get out of here right now. Can you move your arms and legs?" He nodded weakly and tried to push himself up, but he was too weak. The smoke was getting thicker, and Sarah could see that the fire had spread from the stove to the kitchen cabinets. They had maybe 2 minutes before the whole apartment would be engulfed. She grabbed Mr. Davis under his arms and started pulling him toward the door. He was heavy, and every few feet she had to stop and cough, her lungs burning from the smoke. Her eyes were streaming so badly she could barely see. She used her memory of his apartment layout and the faint light from the hallway to guide her. "Stay with me, Mr. Davis," she kept saying as she pulled him across the floor. "We're almost there. Just a little further." Halfway to the door, he became completely limp. Sarah checked his pulse, still beating, but he had passed out from the smoke. Now she was dragging dead weight across a burning apartment, her own strength fading fast. Her arms ached, her lungs felt like they were on fire, and she was getting dizzy from the lack of oxygen. But Sarah had dealt with emergencies before. In the hospital, she had learned to push through exhaustion and fear to save lives. She thought about Mrs. Chen's little boys, about all the patients she had helped over the years, about her promise to herself to always help others when they needed it most. That gave her the strength to keep going. She reached the apartment doorway and pulled Mr. Davis out into the hallway. The air was clearer there, though still smoky. She could breathe a little better, but she wasn't safe yet. She needed to get him downstairs and outside before the fire spread to the hallway. Mr. Davis was starting to come around, coughing violently but breathing on his own. "Sarah?" he whispered, recognizing her voice. "Yes, it's me. Your apartment is on fire, but we're going to be okay. I need you to help me get you downstairs." She helped him sit up against the hallway wall while she caught her breath. That's when she heard new sounds that made her heart sink. More smoke alarms going off. Not just from Mr. Davis's apartment now, but from somewhere else in the building too. The fire was spreading. Sarah looked toward the staircase and saw smoke rising from below. Her stomach dropped as she realized what this meant. The fire had either spread to the first floor, or there was a second fire. Either way, their escape route might be blocked. She helped Mr. Davis to his feet, supporting his weight as they moved toward the stairs. Each step was difficult for him, and she could feel him getting weaker. When they reached the top of the staircase, she could see orange light flickering below. The smoke was much thicker now, rising up the stairwell like a chimney. "We can't go down there," Mr. Davis said between coughs. "We'll never make it through that smoke." Sarah's mind raced through their options. The building only had the main staircase. There was no back exit from the second floor. The windows were too high to jump from safely. They were trapped. But then she remembered something. During her first week living in the building, the landlord had shown her the old fire escape that had been installed decades ago. It was on the side of the building, accessible through the window at the end of the hallway. She had never paid much attention to it because it looked rusty and old, but right now it might be their only chance. "This way," she told Mr. Davis, guiding him away from the staircase toward the hallway window. "There's a fire escape." They made it to the window and Sarah looked out. The metal fire escape was still there, but it looked even more deteriorated than she remembered. Some of the steps were missing, and the whole structure seemed to sway in the morning breeze, but it was their only option. She struggled to open the old window. It was painted shut and hadn't been opened in years. Mr. Davis, despite his weakened condition, helped her push against the frame. Finally, it gave way with a loud crack and cool morning air rushed in. Sarah had never been afraid of heights, but looking down at the narrow metal platform and rickety ladder, she felt her knees go weak. The fire escape dropped straight down to the alley behind the building, a fall of at least 20 feet onto concrete. "I don't think I can make it down that thing," Mr. Davis said, echoing her own fears. "Maybe you should go and get help." "I'm not leaving you," Sarah said firmly. "We're both getting out of here." Sarah climbed out onto the fire escape platform first, testing each step carefully before putting her full weight on it. The metal was cold and slippery from the morning dew, and she could feel it shaking under her feet. She tried not to look down at the concrete alley below. "Okay, Mr. Davis, give me your hand," she called back through the window. "Move slowly and hold on tight to the railing." Getting the elderly man through the window was harder than she had expected. He was still weak from the smoke, and the window frame was narrow. Sarah had to pull while he pushed, both of them working together to get him onto the small platform. Once he was outside, they stood pressed against each other on the tiny metal grating, both breathing hard. The fire escape ladder was worse than it looked from inside. Several rungs were completely missing, and others were loose and bent. Sarah tested the first few steps, her heart pounding as she felt them move under her weight. The entire structure groaned and swayed. "I'll go first," she told Mr. Davis. "Then I'll help guide your feet to the safe spots." She started down slowly, calling out instructions. "Skip the third rung, it's broken." "The fourth one is okay. Put your left foot on the fifth one, but don't put all your weight on it." Mr. Davis followed her directions, moving like a man 3 times his age. His hands shook as he gripped the railings, and twice he had to stop to catch his breath and cough up more smoke from his lungs. Sarah could see that his face was pale and his lips were slightly blue, signs that he wasn't getting enough oxygen. They were halfway down when disaster struck. One of the support bolts holding the fire escape to the building gave way with a loud crack. The entire structure lurched away from the wall, swinging out over the alley. Sarah grabbed the railing with both hands as her feet slipped off the rung she was standing on. "Hold on," she shouted up to Mr. Davis, who was clinging to the ladder above her, his eyes wide with terror. For a few seconds, they swayed back and forth like they were on a broken carnival ride. Sarah could hear more bolts straining under their combined weight. If the whole thing pulled away from the building, they would both fall to the concrete below. Using every bit of strength she had left, Sarah managed to get her feet back on solid rungs. The fire escape had settled at an angle, still attached to the building but leaning out precariously. They were maybe 8 feet from the ground now, close enough that a fall might not kill them but far enough that they could still be seriously hurt. "We need to move fast," Sarah called up to Mr. Davis. "This thing isn't going to hold much longer." She climbed down as quickly as she dared, not testing each step now but just trying to reach the bottom before the whole structure collapsed. Behind her, she could hear Mr. Davis moving faster too, his survival instincts overcoming his exhaustion. Sarah reached the bottom rung just as another support bolt snapped. She jumped the last few feet to the ground, landing hard on her knees in the alley. Pain shot up through her legs, but she ignored it and turned to help Mr. Davis. "Jump," she called to him. "I'll catch you." Mr. Davis hesitated for just a moment, looking down at her with frightened eyes. Then the fire escape gave another ominous groan and he let go. Sarah managed to break his fall, though they both tumbled to the ground in a heap. Mr. Davis landed on top of her, knocking the wind out of her lungs, but they were both alive and relatively unhurt. Above them, the fire escape finally gave up its fight with gravity. With a tremendous crash of twisting metal, it pulled completely away from the building and collapsed in the alley next to them, missing them by less than 3 feet. "Are you hurt?" Sarah asked Mr. Davis as they helped each other stand up. "Just bruises," he said, though she could see he was still having trouble breathing. "What about you?" Sarah's knees were scraped and bleeding and her shoulder ached from where she had thrown it against his door. But she was functioning. "I'm okay. We need to get you to the front of the building where the paramedics are." They walked slowly through the alley toward the street, Mr. Davis leaning on Sarah's arm for support. When they turned the corner, Sarah was amazed at what she saw. The entire street was full of emergency vehicles, fire trucks, ambulances, police cars, and what looked like half the neighborhood, gathered on the sidewalk watching the flames that were now visible from several windows of their building. Mrs. Chen spotted them first and came running over with her 2 boys. "Sarah, Mr. Davis. Thank God you're safe." She was crying with relief. "When we couldn't see you come out the front, and then we heard that terrible crash in the alley." "We're okay," Sarah assured her, though she was starting to feel dizzy now that the immediate danger was over. The adrenaline that had kept her going was wearing off, and her body was finally reacting to everything she had been through. A paramedic rushed over to them with a portable oxygen tank. "Are you the 2 from the 2nd floor? We've been looking for you." They were both given oxygen masks and guided to an ambulance where they could sit down and be examined. Sarah watched as firefighters continued to battle the flames that had now engulfed most of the 1st floor and were spreading to the 2nd floor. Her little yellow apartment with all her pictures and memories was going up in smoke. "How did the fire start?" she asked one of the paramedics. "Looks like it started in the bakery downstairs," he replied. "Some kind of electrical problem with their ovens. It spread fast through the old wooden structure." Sarah realized that if she hadn't smelled the smoke from Mr. Davis's kitchen, if she hadn't investigated, if she hadn't broken down his door, he would have died in his apartment. But she also realized something else. They weren't the only ones who had been in danger. "Wait," she said, suddenly alert again. "What about the other apartments? Are there other people still inside?" The paramedic checked his clipboard. "We've accounted for everyone except the people in apartment 1C. The fire started below them and we haven't been able to reach that part of the building yet." Sarah's heart sank. Apartment 1C was where the Johnsons lived, a young couple with a newborn baby. The husband worked nights like she did, so he would probably be sleeping. The wife stayed home with the baby. If the fire had started on the 1st floor, they might be trapped in their apartment with no way out. She started to get up from the ambulance, but the paramedic gently pushed her back down. "Ma'am, you need to stay here and let us take care of you. You've been through enough." "But there's a baby in there," Sarah protested. "A 3-month-old baby. They might not even know there's a fire yet if they're sleeping." She looked at the building and could see that the 1st floor was completely engulfed now. The firefighters were concentrating their efforts on preventing the flames from spreading to neighboring buildings. Nobody was trying to get inside anymore. It was too dangerous. Sarah pulled off her oxygen mask and stood up despite the paramedics' protests. Her legs were shaky and her lungs still burned from the smoke, but she couldn't just sit there knowing that a family with a baby might be trapped inside. Sarah approached the fire chief, a tall woman with soot-stained gear who was coordinating the firefighting efforts. "Excuse me, I live in this building. There's a young family in apartment 1C, the Johnsons. They have a newborn baby. Have you seen them come out?" The fire chief looked at her with tired eyes. "Are you sure they're in there? We've been calling out and we haven't heard any response from that section of the building. They could be sleeping," Sarah insisted. "Tom Johnson works the night shift at the factory. He gets home around 6 in the morning and sleeps during the day. His wife Lisa stays up late with the baby, so she might be sleeping too. They might not even know about the fire." The fire chief studied the building for a moment. Flames were shooting out of several first-floor windows and smoke was pouring from others. "That whole section is compromised," she said finally. "The floor could collapse at any moment. I can't send my people in there, it's too dangerous." "But there's a baby," Sarah repeated, her voice breaking. "A 3-month-old baby. I understand and I'm sorry. But I have to think about the safety of my firefighters too. If there are people in there, they would have heard us by now. They would have called out or found a way to signal us." Sarah looked at the building again, studying the windows of the first floor. Most of them were either boarded up or showing flames, but she noticed that one window on the side of the building didn't seem to be burning yet. It was small and high up, probably a bathroom window, but it was in the right location to be part of the Johnsons' apartment. An idea formed in her mind. Dangerous and probably stupid, but an idea nonetheless. She had gotten Mr. Davis out safely. Maybe she could help the Johnsons too. She was smaller than the firefighters, more familiar with the building layout, and she knew exactly where their apartment was located. She started walking away from the fire chief, back toward the crowd of onlookers. She needed to think this through carefully. The main entrance to the building was completely blocked by flames. The back entrance, where she and Mr. Davis had escaped, was also too dangerous now. But there was another way in that the firefighters might not know about. The building had been constructed in the 1940s, and like many old buildings, it had a coal cellar that connected to the basement. The entrance to the cellar was on the far side of the building, away from where the fire had started. If she could get into the basement, she might be able to reach the internal staircase that led to the first-floor apartments. Sarah found Mrs. Chen in the crowd and pulled her aside. "I need you to do me a favor," she said quietly. "In about 10 minutes, I want you to create a distraction. Get everyone's attention focused on something else." "Sarah, what are you planning?" Mrs. Chen looked worried. "You can't be thinking of going back in there. There's a family with a baby who might still be inside. The firefighters can't reach them, but maybe I can." "That's insane. You could be killed." "And they definitely will be killed if nobody tries to help them," Sarah replied. "I know this building better than anyone. I know every hallway, every room, every hiding place. If anyone can find them, it's me." Mrs. Chen grabbed her arm. "Sarah, you've done enough. You saved Mr. Davis. You can't save everyone." "Maybe not, but I have to try." Before Mrs. Chen could argue further, Sarah slipped away through the crowd. She circled around the block to approach the building from the opposite side, away from the emergency vehicles and onlookers. Her heart was pounding, and she knew that what she was about to do was incredibly risky. But she also knew that she would never forgive herself if she didn't try. The coal cellar entrance was hidden behind some overgrown bushes. Sarah had discovered it during her first month in the building when she was exploring the property. The door was old and heavy, but it wasn't locked. She pulled it open and stared down into the dark basement. The air coming up from below smelled of smoke, but it wasn't thick like it had been in Mr. Davis's apartment. The fire hadn't reached this part of the building yet, though she could hear the crackling and roaring sounds from above. Sarah climbed down the steep wooden steps into the basement, using her cell phone's flashlight to see. The basement was cluttered with old furniture and storage boxes, but she remembered the layout from when she had helped the landlord retrieve some tools months earlier. There was a staircase at the far end that led up to the first floor, coming out near the Johnsons' apartment. She made her way carefully through the basement, stepping over boxes and dodging hanging pipes. The smoke was getting thicker as she moved toward the internal staircase, and she could feel heat coming from above. The wooden ceiling joists were warm to the touch, which meant the fire was directly overhead in some places. The staircase was narrow and steep, built for utility rather than comfort. Sarah climbed slowly, testing each step to make sure it would hold her weight. Halfway up, she could hear new sounds, not just the fire burning, but voices. Human voices, muffled but definitely there. Her heart leaped with hope. The Johnsons were alive, and they were trapped somewhere nearby. She reached the top of the staircase and found herself in a narrow hallway that ran behind the first-floor apartments. This was a service corridor that most tenants didn't even know existed, used originally by building maintenance. Sarah knew about it because she had helped the landlord fix a plumbing problem back there once. The voices were clearer now, a man and a woman talking urgently, and the sound of a baby crying. They were definitely in their apartment, but they sounded scared and confused. Sarah followed the sound until she found a maintenance door that opened into the back of the Johnsons' apartment. She knocked on the door and called out, "Tom, Lisa, this is Sarah from upstairs. Are you okay in there?" "Sarah?" It was Lisa's voice, full of relief and panic. "We can't get out. The hallway is full of smoke and the front door is too hot to touch. The baby won't stop crying and we don't know what to do." "I'm coming in," Sarah called back. She tried the maintenance door, but it was locked from the inside. "Can you unlock the door behind your kitchen? There's a small door next to your water heater." She heard footsteps and fumbling sounds, then the door opened. Lisa Johnson stood there holding baby Emma, both of them looking terrified but unharmed. Behind Lisa, Tom appeared with a wet towel pressed to his face. "The whole building is on fire," he said between coughs. "We tried to go out the front, but we can't get through the smoke in the hallway." "I know another way out," Sarah told them. "But we have to move fast, and it's going to be difficult with the baby." Sarah quickly explained the escape route through the basement, while Lisa wrapped baby Emma in a thick blanket to protect her from smoke. Tom gathered a few essential items, diapers, formula, and his wallet, stuffing them into a small backpack. "We need to stay low and move fast," Sarah instructed them. "The smoke will be thickest near the ceiling. Lisa, keep the baby's face covered with the blanket, but make sure she can still breathe. Tom, you follow behind us and watch for any signs that the ceiling might collapse." They moved through the maintenance door into the service corridor. The air was much smokier here than it had been just minutes before, and Sarah could see orange light flickering at the far end of the hallway where the fire was spreading. They had to move in the opposite direction toward the basement stairs. Baby Emma was crying loudly now, frightened by the strange surroundings and the smell of smoke. Her cries echoed in the narrow corridor, and Sarah worried that the sound might mask other important noises, like the creaking of wooden beams that were about to give way. "How do you know about this corridor?" Tom asked as they hurried along, staying crouched low. "I helped fix a pipe back here once," Sarah replied. "Most people don't know these service areas exist in old buildings like this." They reached the basement stairs, but Sarah immediately saw a problem. Smoke was now pouring up from below, much thicker than when she had come up just a few minutes earlier. The fire had spread to the basement, probably through the heating ducts or electrical wiring. "Change of plans," she said quickly. "We can't go back the way I came. The basement is filling with smoke." Lisa looked panicked. "Then how do we get out?" Sarah thought frantically. They were trapped in a service corridor with fire spreading on both sides. The regular hallway was impassable due to flames and smoke. The basement escape route was now blocked. She tried to remember every detail of the building's layout, every maintenance area she had ever seen. Then she remembered something else: the dumbwaiter. The building had been constructed when many apartment buildings included small freight elevators for moving supplies between floors. The dumbwaiter had been boarded up decades ago, but the shaft was still there, running from the basement to the roof. "This way," she told the Johnsons, leading them back along the corridor to a small door she had noticed earlier. Behind the door was a cramped space with pipes and electrical panels, and in the back wall a boarded-up opening about 2 feet square. "What is this?" Tom asked. "Old dumbwaiter shaft," Sarah explained, examining the boards that covered the opening. "It goes all the way up to the roof. If we can get these boards off, we might be able to climb up." Tom immediately started pulling at the boards with his hands, but they were nailed securely. "I need something to pry with," he said. Sarah looked around the maintenance area and found an old crowbar hanging on a hook. Together, she and Tom worked to pull off the boards while Lisa tried to comfort the crying baby. The smoke was getting thicker in their small hiding space, and Sarah could feel the temperature rising. Finally, they got the boards off and peered into the dumbwaiter shaft. It was dark and narrow, but there were metal cables and support beams that could serve as handholds. Most importantly, she could see a faint light at the top, probably daylight coming through a roof access panel. "I'll go first," Sarah said. "Then Lisa, you hand me the baby and you come up after her. Tom, you bring up the rear and help push if anyone gets stuck." The climb was terrifying. The shaft was barely wide enough for an adult, and the metal cables were slippery with old grease and dust. Sarah had to brace herself with her back against one wall and her feet against the opposite wall, inching upward slowly while gripping the cables for balance. About halfway up, her muscles started cramping from the awkward position, and she had to stop to rest. Below her, she could hear Lisa struggling with the same climbing technique while trying not to drop baby Emma, who was still crying. Tom was encouraging them both, his voice getting hoarse from the smoke. "Keep going," he called up. "I can see fire through the cracks in the wall down here. We need to get out of this shaft soon." The last part of the climb was the hardest because Sarah's arms and legs were exhausted from the unusual strain. But finally, she reached the top of the shaft where there was indeed a roof access panel. She pushed against it with her shoulder, and it opened with a groan of rusty hinges. Cool morning air and sunlight poured down into the shaft, the most beautiful thing Sarah had ever experienced. She climbed out onto the flat roof of the building and immediately reached back down to help Lisa. Getting baby Emma through the narrow opening was tricky, but they managed it by having Lisa lift the baby as high as she could, while Sarah reached down and carefully pulled Emma up to safety. The baby had stopped crying and seemed almost calm now that she was breathing fresh air again. Lisa came up next, her face streaked with soot and tears of relief. She immediately took Emma back into her arms and held her close, checking to make sure she was unharmed. Tom was the last to emerge from the shaft, and by the time he reached the roof, smoke was pouring out of the opening behind him. They were safe, but they were also stranded on the roof of a burning building. Sarah looked around, trying to figure out how to get down to street level. The roof was flat with a low parapet wall around the edges, but it was at least 30 feet above the ground, too high to jump. There, Tom pointed to the corner of the roof where an old iron ladder was bolted to the outside wall. "Fire escape ladder. Looks like it goes all the way down to the alley." They hurried to the ladder, but Sarah's heart sank when she saw its condition. Like the fire escape she and Mr. Davis had used, this ladder was old and rusty. Several rungs were missing and the whole structure looked unstable. "I don't think this will hold all of us," she said, "especially not with the baby." But they didn't have much choice. Smoke was now coming up through the roof access panel, and they could hear the fire spreading through the building below them. If they stayed on the roof much longer, they might be overcome by smoke or trapped by flames. Tom tested the ladder first, putting his weight on each rung carefully. "It's shaky, but it's holding," he reported. "Sarah, you go first. If anything breaks, you're the lightest and most likely to survive a fall." "I'm not leaving you up here with the baby," Sarah protested. "Then we all go together, very carefully. Lisa, you carry Emma. I'll go right below you in case you slip. Sarah, you go last and keep watch above us." They started the dangerous descent, moving one rung at a time. Lisa held baby Emma with one arm while gripping the ladder with the other, her knuckles white with fear. Tom stayed directly below her, ready to catch both of them if she lost her grip. Sarah followed above them, constantly looking up to watch for falling debris from the burning building. They were about halfway down when disaster struck again. A piece of burning wood fell from a window above them, striking the ladder just above Sarah's head. The impact jarred the entire structure loose from the wall, and suddenly they were all swaying outward over the alley. "Hold on," Sarah shouted, though she could barely maintain her own grip. The ladder tilted further away from the building, creaking and groaning under their combined weight. Sarah could see that the bolts holding it to the wall were pulling loose one by one. In another few seconds, the whole thing would collapse. "Jump!" she yelled to Tom and Lisa. "You're close enough to the ground." Tom dropped first, landing hard on the concrete but rolling to absorb the impact. He immediately stood up and positioned himself below Lisa and the baby. "Drop Emma to me first," he called up. Lisa hesitated for just a moment. What parent wants to drop their baby from a height? But she trusted her husband and knew it was their only chance. She carefully lowered Emma as far as she could, then let go. Tom caught the baby safely, though the impact knocked him to his knees. Lisa jumped next, and Tom caught her too, though they both tumbled to the ground in a heap. Sarah was alone on the swaying ladder now, about 12 feet above the alley. She could feel the remaining bolts giving way, and she knew she had only seconds before the whole structure collapsed. She let go and dropped, trying to land on her feet like the others had done, but she was exhausted from everything she had been through, and her landing was clumsy. She hit the concrete hard and felt something pop in her left ankle. Pain shot up her leg, but she was alive and conscious. Tom helped her sit up against the alley wall while Lisa checked baby Emma one more time. The baby seemed completely unharmed by the ordeal. In fact, she had stopped crying and was looking around with curious eyes, as if this were all just an interesting adventure. "Can you walk?" Tom asked Sarah, examining her swollen ankle. "I don't think so," she admitted, "but I'll be okay. You two need to get to the street and find the paramedics. Make sure Emma gets checked out." "We're not leaving you here," Lisa said firmly. "You risked your life to save us. We're getting out of this together." Tom helped Sarah stand up, supporting her weight while she hopped on one foot. Together, the four of them made their way slowly through the alley toward the street, where they could hear the sounds of fire trucks and emergency vehicles. When they emerged from the alley, Sarah was amazed at how much the scene had changed. The fire had spread to cover most of the building now, and several neighboring buildings had been evacuated as a precaution. There were twice as many emergency vehicles as before, and the street was crowded with firefighters, police officers, paramedics, and curious onlookers. Mrs. Chen was the first to spot them, and she came running over with tears streaming down her face. "Sarah, we thought you were dead. When you disappeared, and then we heard explosions from inside the building." "I'm okay," Sarah assured her, though she was leaning heavily on Tom for support. "We're all okay." The paramedics surrounded them immediately, checking each of them for injuries and smoke inhalation. Baby Emma was whisked away to an ambulance where a pediatric specialist could examine her more thoroughly. Lisa went with her, but she kept looking back at Sarah with gratitude in her eyes. Sarah was loaded onto a stretcher and given oxygen, while a paramedic examined her ankle. "Looks like a bad sprain," he said. "You'll need x-rays to rule out a fracture, but you should be fine." As they wheeled her toward an ambulance, Sarah looked back at the building that had been her home for almost 2 years. The entire structure was now engulfed in flames, and she knew that nothing inside would be salvaged. All her belongings, her photos, her nursing certificates, everything was gone. But everyone was alive. Mr. Davis, Mrs. Chen and her boys, the Johnson family, and baby Emma and herself. That was what mattered. 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of the rebuilt community center on Maple Street, watching children play in the new playground that had been constructed, where the old apartment building once stood. Her ankle had healed completely, though it still ached sometimes when the weather changed. The doctors had said she was lucky. It could have been much worse. The fire had made national news not because of the building that burned down, but because of what Sarah had done that day. Reporters had called her a hero, though she never felt comfortable with that word. She had simply done what needed to be done, what anyone with medical training and a conscience would have done, but the attention had changed her life in ways she never expected. The hospital where she worked had promoted her to head nurse of the emergency department, recognizing not just her bravery but her quick thinking and leadership under pressure. The pay increase had allowed her to rent a nicer apartment in a newer building with modern safety features. She had a proper fire escape now, smoke detectors in every room, and sprinkler systems throughout the building. But more importantly, the fire had brought the community together in ways Sarah had never imagined. The tragedy had revealed how many people were willing to help their neighbors when crisis struck. Within days of the fire, local businesses had donated clothes, food, and temporary housing for all the displaced residents. A fundraising campaign had raised enough money to help everyone get back on their feet. Mr. Davis had moved into a senior living facility with better medical support, but he visited Sarah regularly. His smoke-damaged lungs had never fully recovered, but his spirit was stronger than ever. He had started volunteering at the community center, teaching woodworking skills to local teenagers. "I want to pass on something useful," he told Sarah. "You saved my life, so now I have extra years to make a difference." Mrs. Chen and her boys had found a larger apartment just 2 blocks away. The boys, now 6 years old, still remembered the day of the fire, and often asked Sarah to tell them the story again. They had both expressed interest in becoming firefighters when they grew up. Inspired by the emergency responders they had met that day, the Johnson family had used their insurance money to buy a small house in the suburbs. Baby Emma, now 9 months old, was walking and babbling constantly. She had no memory of the fire, of course, but Lisa and Tom would never forget what Sarah had done for them. They had named Sarah as Emma's godmother, an honor that meant more to her than any news article or commendation. Sarah walked through the community center. admiring the bright modern spaces that had been created. There was a library, a computer lab, meeting rooms for local organizations, and a large multi-purpose room where community events were held. The center had become a hub for the neighborhood, bringing people together regularly instead of just during emergencies. In the main hallway, there was a small memorial wall dedicated to the Maple Street fire. It included photos of the old building, newspaper clippings about the rescue efforts, and a plaque that read, "In recognition of ordinary people who do extraordinary things when their neighbors need help." Sarah's photo was there, along with photos of Mr. Davis, the Johnson family, and even Mrs. Chen and her boys. But Sarah was most proud of another addition to the wall: information about fire safety, emergency preparedness, and community response planning. The memorial wasn't just about looking back at what had happened. It was about helping people be ready for whatever might happen in the future. Sarah had become something of an expert on emergency preparedness, giving talks at schools and community organizations about fire safety and disaster response. She had learned that many people don't know basic things like how to check smoke detector batteries, how to plan escape routes from their homes, or how to help someone who is suffering from smoke inhalation. The most important thing, she always told her audiences, is to stay calm and think clearly. In an emergency, panic kills more people than the actual danger. If you can keep your head and remember your training, you can save lives, including your own. She had also lobbied successfully for stronger fire safety regulations in older buildings throughout the city. New laws now required regular inspections of fire escapes, upgraded electrical systems in buildings over 50 years old, and mandatory smoke detectors in all residential units. Sarah knew that these changes might prevent future tragedies. The insurance company had investigated the fire thoroughly and determined that it started with faulty wiring in the bakery's ovens. The electrical system had been installed in the 1960s and had never been properly updated. The bakery owners had been unaware of the danger, but the investigation led to citywide inspections of similar businesses. Sarah often thought about how differently things could have turned out. If she hadn't smelled the smoke, if she hadn't investigated, if she hadn't known about the building's hidden passages and emergency exits, people would have died. But she also knew that her actions that day were built on years of training, experience, and a fundamental belief in helping others. Her nursing career had prepared her for medical emergencies, but it was her personality, her unwillingness to ignore someone else's suffering, that had made the real difference. She had learned that being a hero wasn't about being fearless or superhuman. It was about caring enough to act when action was needed, even when you were scared. At the community center's dedication ceremony, Sarah was asked to give a speech. She had been nervous about public speaking, but when she looked out at the audience, filled with familiar faces from the neighborhood, including all the people who had been affected by the fire, the words came naturally. 6 months ago, we all learned something important about ourselves and our community, she began. We learned that when crisis strikes, we don't have to face it alone. We learned that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they work together. And we learned that helping our neighbors isn't just the right thing to do. It's what makes us human. She looked directly at Mr. Davis, who was sitting in the front row with his walker beside him. We all have opportunities every day to help someone else. Sometimes it's something big like rescuing people from a fire, but more often it's small things. Checking on an elderly neighbor, helping a young mother carry groceries, or just listening when someone needs to talk. Mrs. Chen smiled at her from the audience, her boys sitting quietly beside her for once. The fire took our building, but it gave us something more valuable. It showed us that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. We're part of a community that cares. Tom and Lisa Johnson were there too, with baby Emma sleeping peacefully in Lisa's arms. I hope that when Emma grows up in this neighborhood, she'll learn the same lesson we all learned that day, that we're responsible for taking care of each other. After the ceremony, Sarah walked home to her new apartment, taking her time to enjoy the evening air. She passed the playground where she could see children playing under the careful watch of their parents. She passed Mr. Thompson's flower shop, which had survived the fire and was thriving now with increased foot traffic from the community center. The old bakery had been rebuilt as a small restaurant, with modern electrical systems and state-of-the-art fire suppression equipment. The owners had asked Sarah to be their first customer when they reopened, an honor she had accepted gratefully. As she reached her building, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed. She had always been someone who helped others. That was why she became a nurse. But the fire had taught her that helping others wasn't just her job, it was her calling. She had discovered reserves of strength and courage she didn't know she possessed. More importantly, she had learned that heroism isn't about being perfect or fearless. It's about being willing to act when action is needed, even when you're scared, even when you don't have all the answers. Sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is simply refuse to give up on someone who needs help. Sarah climbed the stairs to her apartment, grateful for the working elevator but choosing to walk anyway. She needed the exercise, and she enjoyed the routine of climbing stairs. It reminded her that she was strong and capable. In her apartment, she looked at the new photos she had hung on the walls. There were pictures of her family from Texas, certificates from her job at the hospital, and thank you cards from patients she had helped over the years. But there were also new photos, pictures from the community center dedication, a group shot of all the fire survivors, and a photo of baby Emma taking her first steps. She had lost everything material in the fire, but she had gained something invaluable, the knowledge that she could make a real difference in the world, one person at a time. And she had gained a community of friends who would be there for each other no matter what challenges lay ahead. Sarah Martinez, the quiet night shift nurse who had thought she was just another ordinary person, had learned that there was nothing ordinary about choosing to help others when they needed it most. She had risen from the flames of that terrible day not as someone different, but as someone who finally understood her own strength and purpose, and she was ready for whatever came next.